Hi everyone, welcome back to our next video. Today we'll be talking about legal analysis and how to write a legal studies essay. This is mainly for students of Year 12 legal studies, but if you are studying law at university, this may be helpful as well. Except at university, you get a better grade if you are able to critique these. You do that in legal studies, but at university you obviously do that at a more advanced level. So let's get started. So we're going to start with how to write a legal studies essay. Keep in mind that any essay question in legal studies is asking you the same thing. Is the current law effective? And if you say yes, what is effective about it? What is your evidence? If not, and obviously this is going to be the majority, what isn't effective about it, and what is your evidence that it's not effective? Where does it need reform? And if you can even offer examples of things that you recommend, recommendations, that would be the best. So think of the scales of justice. Think of Lady Justice here holding the scales. If you put one set of rights on one side, will it outweigh the opposing side's set of rights? Okay, so let's just stop for a sec and get out an example of Lady Justice so you can sort of visualize it. So here I just went to Google and I looked up Lady Justice scales and on images, and this is what's come up. So say for example here, the scales of justice are equal and they're supposed to represent the two opposing sides in court. What you want is that you want this person's rights to be equal to this person's rights. This is actually not a good example of what the scales should be, because this means that this person has more rights than this person. You want the scales to be equal because that is the point of justice, that two opposing sides are equal. So we'll just get back to our Word document. So if you have one set of rights on one side, will it outweigh the opposing set of rights? So for example, in criminal law, do the rights of the victim outweigh the rights of the accused, or vice versa? And you want them to be equal, because even if someone is accused, they still have the right to explain what they did, why they did it, if they did it even, etc. So the Year 11 syllabus gives you a list of ideas to help you answer this. To find out whether something is just, they say you look at the resource efficiency, you look at the accessibility, because if only some people can access, for example, say the drug court, that isn't just because it's not accessible to everyone. Enforceability, is it going to be enforced on everyone, or are some people going to get away with it, like say if they're rich, for example? That wouldn't be just. Responsiveness, is it able to respond to the needs of society? Is there a protection for individual rights? Will it meet society's needs? The application of the rule of law. And then you get to the point, has justice been achieved? Now in Year 12, it doesn't give you that same list. You can use that list. There's nothing saying that you can't, but you can also add your own. Okay, so before you continue, write a page of notes summarizing your views on the effectiveness of law for criminal, human rights, family, consumer law. These are the ones that, these two electives are the ones that my school does, but obviously if you do shelter, if you do New World Order, whatever, you can also do them, but criminal and human rights are the core, so they must be done by everyone. So, just write down a couple of dot points, even a couple of sentences. Do you think the law is effective in criminal? What do you think is effective? What do you think is not effective? Do you think the law is effective in human rights? In what aspects do you think it's effective? In what aspects do you think it's not effective? That will help you articulate your thoughts before you start, because you already know what you are arguing. Now, you have to always have an argument. There is no, it's not asking you write everything you've ever heard about criminal law, write everything you've ever heard about human rights. It's about the idea of this is your argument about the effectiveness of the law. Okay? And keep in mind your question, which areas in each law do you think is effective and which areas need reform? So the specifics are different depending on the question. So you may be asked about the effectiveness of the law in the area of victims' rights, for example, but as a whole, this is your main answer that you're concentrating on. So the difficulty may be that the essay question in criminal law is asking you specifically on victims' rights, or it's asking you specifically about judges' discretion, or it's asking you about whatever. Then it's being really specific, but it's going to be the same thing. Do you think that the law is effective? Why or why not? It's the same question, it just might be on a specific thing. So let's keep going. Think about the scales of justice. When you put the different conflicting groups' rights on each side, will they be equal? Does some group have more or less rights than others? And be specific in which area. Again, you must have an argument. If you write down every relevant legislation and case, but you don't have an argument, you can't get into the top bands. You need to be very specific with your argument. I'm just going to pause here for a second to say something in case I hadn't already. I can't remember if I did or not. But I would not recommend that you start writing legal studies essays if you are struggling still with English, because I would highly recommend that you get into the habit of writing English essays first if possible, and then go to legal studies, because legal studies is a lot more complicated, a lot more advanced, and I would suggest that you first follow the steps for English because there's less of them. And then when you get a little bit more confident, then you should probably go into legal studies. Obviously, you can't do that if you're already, enrolled in legal studies and you're, like a quarter of the way or half of the way through or whatever. But I would highly suggest that you practice first with English, because English is shorter in steps, whereas legal studies has a little bit more steps, so you might get a bit more confused. So we're not professionals here, that's why I said this in the middle of the video. But anyway, so how to support your ideas. So if in English you are supporting your ideas through quotes and technique, example, effect, here it's different, because you're still supporting yourself, but you're supporting yourself with statistics, quotes, research papers, cases, etc. This requires you to research. Research and using your own research is an actual outcome in the legal studies syllabus that you must make sure that you meet. For every point you say, make sure that you back it up with evidence. So it's like English in that sense, that with everything you say in English, you should back it up with evidence from the text. But here your evidence is from obviously legal sources. So what do I mean by your research? There's no point having 100 journal articles that you do not analyze. You need to analyze them. We will talk about that later. Go out and see what reports have been published and what we have studied. What have the judges said about this? What's been said in the media? These are all part of your research. You don't have to agree with them. In fact, it is really, really liked when you critique something that you may have read, something that you disagree with, but it is still your evidence, so you must refer to it. Let's go down to the next part. Make sure you know the key legislation for each unit. That's your starting point, okay? Because you always start with your legislation first, as in this table. After that, know your key cases, because the key cases are the application of the legislation in real life. Now, just remember in your argument, there's no point in having the perfect legislation written down if when applied, it doesn't lead to justice. Okay, if the application of the legislation leads to injustice, that is an ineffective law. It is an ineffective key legislation. Okay, so for example, you would fill out this like a TEE table, like a technique, example, effect table, except that you've got these things. So, for example, if you're talking about the law of causation, you'd have the legislation and then you'd have the case. So here you'd write R and blau or blue, whatever you are. I don't know how to pronounce it, and I will never know how to pronounce it, so just go with me. Then you would have any treaties or instruments that have been signed or declared about causation. Then you'd go to journal, research papers, statistics, media. Then you go to the criteria, and that is really how you are analyzing. Not everything is going to be relevant. You may have legislation case, and there may be no treaty or instrument about it. Or there may be no media article that you really specifically want to speak about. Then you go into the criteria. You're obviously not going to go through each section of the criteria because not each section is going to be relevant. Okay? Just obviously go with the ones that are relevant to you, but that's basically the step that you are following. I highly recommend that you keep a table like this for each subject. So you should have one for crime, you should have one for human rights, and you should have one for each elective that you are studying. So you're going to go from left to right, and that's the way that you're going to write it in your paragraph. So you will always start with the legislation, and then you will go into the cases because, like we said before, it's the application of the legislation in real life scenarios. And then you will go on to anything else, but you always start with legislation because if you ever go to a lawyer, they will always go to the legislation first. Okay, so when you get to the question, you ask yourself first, identify the Board of Studies key term in the question. Most of the elective essays, so consumer law, family law, world order, shelter, whatever your school has decided to do, will ask you to evaluate and assess. Okay, so your criminal one will be something less. It will be something like discuss. But for the larger essays, because they're worth more, they're going to be higher order skills such as evaluate and assess. Both evaluate and assess are asking you to make some sort of judgment on the law. So this means that you need to go into the exam asking yourself, what do I think about the current state of criminal, human rights, family, workplace, whatever you are studying? Spend a few minutes now jotting down your ideas on what you think because you're trying to make a judgment. Remember, you're evaluating and assessing, you are judging whether it is effective or not. Number two, I always encourage students to turn the question into a checklist to make sure that you cover every aspect of the question. Try to tick them off as you answer so that you know that you've covered every aspect. This is especially helpful in an exam when you want to make sure that you haven't missed anything. You don't really have time to read over things in exam. You may read over it for like a minute. It's not like an assessment, in which case you've got days or weeks even. So just make sure that you've done that in the exam. Number three is about the essay plan. So this is especially important if it's during an exam. Spend 2 to 5 minutes structuring your ideas. This can be in the form of a mind map, dot points, pictures, whatever you want. In it, make sure that you clarify your main arguments that you will make in the essay, and also write down the main legislation, the key cases, any other statistics, case studies, journal articles, quotes, etc. that you will be using. Make sure that you've got it in your plan so that you can just go straight into using your plan to write. Now, I know that some people may not want to spend 2 to 5 minutes because you want to get in there and you don't want to, waste time, and you want to just get into the main parts. However, you will find that this is actually really detrimental, And the reason that it's detrimental is that you're approaching your essay not from the idea of you want to make an argument, but you're approaching it as you're going to get in there and say everything that comes to your mind about the topic. A band 5 or a band 6 answer has an argument, a clear, strong, coherent, consistent argument, and anything else is not going to get you a band 5 or 6, so it's not worth doing. I'm going to tell you a story time later about my own adventures when I didn't spend 2 to 5 minutes in an exam because I didn't want to waste, so-called waste that time, and it was really traumatic, and I still remember it 20 years later, so don't do that. Now, the essay structure. Let's go into the essay structure. The legal studies essay uses the same general structure as other subjects. So in English and history, you'll find that it's the same sort of structure. You should always have an argument, whether it's for legal or any other subject, that you are putting forward, except in legal studies, you are talking about the effectiveness of the law. So you must have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Every paragraph should be about one main idea. And I suggest that you, in your planning, you write down what those main ideas are. So maybe come up with 5 to 7. I always go for 5 to 7. Go in there, brainstorm everything that you want, and then pick the best 5 to 7. And that could be your 5 to 7 paragraphs. So you're going to elaborate on those 5 to 7 ideas, one idea per paragraph. Let's go to the introduction. So your introduction should tell me directly what your viewpoint is about the question. Your thesis, which is the very first sentence in your whole essay, should answer the entire question. So I should be able to read your very first sentence of your legal studies essay, and that is all, and still know what your essay is about. If you've done that, then you know that you've done it correctly. If the question says evaluate the effectiveness of family law in achieving just outcomes, your very first sentence, which is called your thesis statement, should be something like family law is an area that needs extensive reform as it is currently ineffective in achieving justice or just outcomes. Can you see how I've answered that? I've used the same wording, always try to use the same wording of the question, turn it into a sentence that basically sums up your entire essay. If you can do that successfully, then you've effectively and successfully created the thesis statement. Okay. So you don't need to be 100% on either side. You may say that in some areas it's effective and in others it needs reform, but you must be clear as to which side you are on. You won't find any area of law that is 100% effective. Neither will you find any area of law that is 0% effective. If you do, wowzers, you've just struck like amazing luck. Okay, but for the rest of us, you could be somewhere in the middle. Now, in your introduction, you should give an outline of the main arguments you plan on making. So be clear as to what you think. Okay, so that's why I always suggest that you have your essay plan prepared before you go in and answer it, because your introduction needs to have a clear idea of what your main arguments will be. Now, if you are just starting out writing essays and you're not really confident, then for assessments, you can write your introduction at the end, not have it written at the end, or always have it at the top of your essay, but you can practice writing it at the end just until you get more confident in your writing of essays. So a strong introduction sets the tone for a strong essay, so make sure that your intro, which should be about 7 to 8 sentences, is attention grabbing. So your body, let's go to the next section, which is your body of your essay. Your body is very important as it is the crux of your essay. It is vital that you have one idea per paragraph. If you have a new idea, then start a new paragraph. Remember, you're looking at about 7 to 8 sentences on one idea, and then you start a new 7 to 8 sentences on the next idea, which is actually your paragraph. So you think of every paragraph as a mini essay. It has an introduction, which is your topic sentence, your body, and a conclusion, which is your concluding sentence. So you have one big essay in it and a bunch of baby essays in it. How exciting. Look, that's like, yeah, just, anyway, let's continue. So your paragraph should start with a topic sentence. Your topic sentence should summarize what the entire paragraph is about, and most importantly, what your main argument will be for this paragraph. So your topic sentence is one sentence that summarizes what everything is about. In theory, I should be able to read only the first sentence of each paragraph and still have a clear understanding of what your entire essay is about. Let me fix that because that's going to annoy me. Okay, so your paragraph should then go on to the body of it. Your body of your essay should go on the following structure, and this is vital. Highlighted in red to grab your attention. If I still haven't got your attention, you're really not paying attention. So, your topic sentence, your main legislation, then your key cases, other cases, case studies, statistics, quotes, etc. Then a critique of the law, then judgment of the effectiveness of the law if justice has been achieved, and a summary or a linking sentence. If you want, you can copy this and type your answers in, or you can copy this and write your answers in if it's an exam and just follow this scaffold. That should be the way. Don't have your main legislation at the end. Don't have a case before a legislation. You start with the legislation, then in the order. This section you can play around with. It doesn't need to be other cases, case studies, statistics, quotes. If you want to do a declaration or an instrument or some crime somewhere there, that's fine. But just make sure that you have your main legislation, your key case, and then whatever order makes you happy and makes you sleep at night, follow that. So to refresh your memory, this is from the How to Evaluate the Law steps. If you've never seen this document, welcome. So how we're going to analyze and evaluate for legal is first we're going to go to the legislation, and we're going to do this very concisely. Like you can answer this in maybe 3 sentences if possible, okay? So you will start with the legislation. What context was the legislation passed in? So for example, in outlaw motorcycle gangs, most of the legislation was passed because there was a public murder at the airport. And basically it was a sort of, knee-jerk reaction. They wanted really quick legislation, so they didn't really think about the problems that might arise from this legislation. So that could be important in the context. It might not be important. This is just something for you to think about and then decide if it's important or not. So was there a case or event that preceded it? So for example, native title was subsequent to Mabo. Okay, so that's what it means by, is there something that preceded it that you may want to talk about in sort of the context part? What impact do you think this had on the passing of the legislation? So you may say, it was a knee-jerk reaction, they wanted to do it fast, or even something like it made them realize that there was a problem. Up to you, whatever the answer is, but just keep it in mind. The next one is, what are 3 positive, what are 3 negative points of the legislation? You don't need 3. It was just a number that I liked, so I threw that out there. But you write as many as you want. Just make sure that you don't spend so much time on it. Do you think the legislation is still relevant today? Why not? What reform do you think should pass on the legislation, if any? And basically that's how you're analyzing and evaluating. And of course, you're going through the criteria that we mentioned before. So going through things like accessibility, resource efficiency, etc. And for the cases, what's the background to the case? Are there any important events that come into play in the case? Were there any dissenting judges to the case? This is often really overlooked. Even though you have amazing justices or judges like Justice Kirby, who had some really good ideas in the dissenting judgments, and you think that just because they didn't win as such, but sometimes dissenting judgments are actually really important in understanding a case. So just keep that in mind. What are three positive and negatives of the case? Again, you don't need three. Is the case still used as precedent today? Do you think it should be? Do you think it's outdated? Do you think, whatever? Has or should the case be legislated? So that basically is asking, do you think this case should be put into legislation? So it's not just a case, and that it is the first point of call for a lawyer to go to or a judge to go to in deciding something. That's up to you to decide. And that should be the body of your paragraph. Of course, this is the formula for justice. So if somewhere along those lines you've mentioned those things that we talked about before, so the idea of accessibility, resource efficiency, etc., the rule of law, then that's a really good analysis, and that's how you should be analyzing it. So the final part is your concluding sentence of your paragraph. Here you are simply summarizing your main argument of this paragraph and relating it to the essay question using the wording of the question when possible. Okay, so in your original example, you would say, thus it is clear that in regards to same-sex families, the law needs extensive reform to enable effective and just outcomes. That was just one example of an element that you may use for family. Of course, it depends on the question, but I just wanted to show that you're going to be specific regarding your concluding sentence. So it's not just rewording the question. You are going to be specific about what the paragraph was about. That's why I use that. So remember to have a running argument. Your paragraphs can't be the law isn't effective in XYZ, and your introduction says, your introduction and your conclusion say that family law is effective. You need to have a very clear, specific argument. That said, try to have your paragraphs linked in some way so that they flow. It is important as it is part of the marking criteria. Your essay should have an argument that is logical, cohesive, and coherent. Part of that means making your paragraphs flow. So I've seen some essays that look like they were written by 3 different students who'd never met each other. That's not a good essay. You want an essay that has a clear, concise, flowing argument and it's coherent. Okay, and what I mean by concise is don't repeat your points. If you've already said your point, good on you, keep going. Go to the next one. Don't harp on the same things, otherwise you're just going to be repetitive and you're not really getting anywhere. Now, my final thing to say before my nose blocks and I absolutely die of lack of oxygen is one suggestion is to try to pick a theme so that all your paragraphs have something in common. That way you can have a theme that links all your paragraphs. So your theme may be justice, your theme may be the rule of law, your theme may be accessibility, your theme may be whatever it is that you want. Okay? So the conclusion, if your topic sentence, now this is a lazy student's hack. You don't have to use it, but if you want to, go for it. If your topic sentences and your concluding sentences were written properly, this should be a breeze. I would suggest going through, rewording your topic sentences and concluding sentences to create your conclusion. So if you've written your topic sentences correctly, what should be able to happen is that you go and you take each topic sentence of each paragraph or each concluding sentence from each paragraph, tweak them, and that is your new conclusion. The reason that this works is because your topic sentence and your concluding sentences of your paragraphs are what you've talked about. So if you've written them correctly, that's all you need for your paragraph. You just put them together and that is your conclusion. So I do hope that this has been helpful. Please let me know if it has. Don't forget to check out the other videos that we have to help you in your writing. Good luck, and don't forget to speak nerdy.